Well, it's our pleasure today to introduce to you Mark Lawson, who's the president of MorningStar Music Company, and he's going to share some insights with us today about the music publishing industry, specifically the church music publishing industry, which is a very fascinating subject. And so let's welcome Mark Lawson.
Thank you. It's fun to be here. Love Baylor. And I just have to say, I get a kick out of the fact that she's the one that spent all the time in Minnesota and has a coat on. Okay? It just slays me that the one person that spent the most time in cold weather has to wear a coat down here. But no, it's great to be here. And I want you to know, first of all, that you have a tremendous faculty to work with. These people I admire and have admired for a long time. And you're very lucky to get to work with folks like that. So I want you to know you should greatly appreciate them. Help me get to know you just a little better. If I were to ask you where you want to be in 5 years and what you want to be doing, give me a little representation of what you think you're going to be doing in 5 years. Uh-oh. Who can tell me? What do you think?
I will be a full-time music minister in a local church.
Okay.
I'm doing diverse music and ensembles and missions.
Okay. Good. Very good. What else? What do you hope to be doing? Yes.
Children's music ministry and voice teaching.
Okay. Good. Any other career goals here?
Possibly practicing law.
Okay. Good. You want to be a copyright attorney? We need them. Very good. What else? Anybody want to be? Yes? Go ahead.
Music missionary overseas.
Okay. Music missionaries. Any recording people want to be here? Okay. You want to
Maybe.
on the performing side or the
Possibly performing side.
Okay. Anything else? I remember back, believe it or not, I can remember back when I was in college, and I remember sitting in the room such as you are sitting now. Never, ever, ever would I have thought I would be doing what I'm doing today. Okay? And I didn't even know when I was there that this kind of job actually existed. Okay? And that what the publishing industry was like at all. And so what I thought I would do today is tell you a little bit about it, but I want you to ask your questions. Okay? I want you to feel like that you understand a little bit about what the publishing industry is like, because it greatly affects every single thing you've mentioned in here. Okay? And it has an awful lot to do with what materials you have to work with when you're out there and how you relate to those things. If I were to say, what do you think a publisher is? What would your definition be of a publisher? What do you think it is?
Person or company that takes music from composers and makes copies, puts it in a nice format, and sells it.
Okay, good. That's what I think. But there's also another version of it, and I want to make sure we understand. The word publisher technically only means the person who administers the copyrights or owns the copyrights. Okay? There are many publishers in the country who do no physical printing of any kind. So if you read the paper, and today in the New York Times, there was an article about a music publisher. On the record side of that industry, that person, they may not print a thing, but they control the copyright. Okay? Everything in publishing stems from copyright ownership. So you write a song. The minute you write a song, the way our copyright laws read, you own the song. Okay? Now, if you copy the song, obviously, you're in violation of that copyright. And after you've written that song, it lasts 70 years past your death. That no one can do anything else with it. What happens is, he has this great song, he decides that something ought to be done with it. So he may go to a publisher. He may become the publisher himself, but he does something with the copyright on that song. he either sells it to somebody like me, okay, who then goes and figures out, what am I going to do with this thing, okay? Now, I can give it to, depending on what kind of company I am, I can give it to a recording artist to try to make a recording. Or I can say, oh, this is a print music kind of product that I'm going to put into print. Or I can say, I'm just going to sit here and hold on to it because somebody's going to want to do something with it, like putting in a hymnal or a song collection or something like that. So a word that you hear, and it's not a good word, but it's the word that we use in the industry, and I had to learn to get over it, is a publisher exploits copyrights. Okay? Exploit, in this sense, in the legal sense, is not a bad word. Exploit means that you look for all the ways to utilize that copyright. Now, if I were a, let's say I'm a big publisher like a Hal Leonard, okay, and all of a sudden I buy the rights to Let It Be by the Beatles, all right? I'm going to put out a choral arrangement of that. Then I'm going to put out a band arrangement of that. Then I'm going to put out a children's choir arrangement of that. Then I'm going to put out all the same copyright, but I'm exploiting it by getting it out here in all these different forms so that people can utilize that song. At the heart of everything else in publishing, that's what we do. Okay? We take the copyright and we figure out what to do with it. The other thing you really ought to know about publishing is that it's a business. Right? Every company at the heart of it has to be a business, has to make money on it somehow. Even the denominational publishing houses. Okay? When Dr. York was working at the Sunday School Board at, when we called it at that point, Lifeway, I'm sure you had to report it above and that they watched your department to see if you came out in the black. Okay? And that projects that didn't come out in the black probably were under question and all that. Everybody I know who works in a denominational publishing house are under that kind of pressure as well. Not just the people who it's a company, for-profit company. And yet mission, for us, I think mission is at the heart of what we try to do. We try to say, what do we think ought to be out there? And what do we think is good for the church? I wanted to show you this because there's two parts about what we do. We own two companies. One is Canticle Distributing, and then one is MorningStar Music Publishers. Canticle Distributing, for us, distributes the music to music stores, to individuals, to all this kind of stuff. And then all of these different companies are different imprints, what you call an imprint of music, and they all do something different. I only control this one. These are all owned by other people, and we distribute for them. So there's two sides of what we end up doing, the publishing side and the distributing side. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. I want to go back to copyright just for a minute because I think it is probably the most misunderstood thing out there. Your generation, and I know this because I have people in your generation. I have a daughter that's a senior at Wake Forest and one that just graduated from Wake Forest. Have had more challenges to understanding this than other people in our generation because you've had access to the internet in a way that no one has ever had before. And what they tell us is that people in your generation really don't care about owning something like a piece of music as long as you have access to it. How many of you use Pandora? Okay. How many of you are using things like Spotify yet? Are you doing that yet? Okay, you're using that. Are any of the locker services that you're using? You know what I mean by locker services? Okay. A locker service is like the things that are coming out. Spotify is basically like a locker service, but you own your MP3s. They go out onto the cloud. You've all heard about the cloud. Okay, and you have access to it, and you have access to it through your computer, through your iPhone, or all your different ways that you can get it. But you can get to your things that you own. Okay, or you can subscribe to a service that gives you access to this stuff, but it's all out there, and whatever device you have that you want to connect to it, you can. So you're all pretty much using that kind of thing, aren't you? How many of you are using that kind of thing? No. Okay. Now, this is one of the things that we face in publishing today, is right here, we probably face, if I have a new piece of music, they may like the piece of music and you may like the piece of music, but the way you're going to find it may be two completely different ways. Okay? So as a publisher, I sit there and go, uh-oh, now how am I going to get you to know about the piece of music and for them to know about the piece of music? Okay? So that's another challenge that we're all facing. And so our websites have become so extremely important for this. But copyright, when you go back to that for a minute, is such a sticky wicket of a subject. Because everybody thinks the record industry, publishers are being really mean by enforcing copyright. This is what I would want you to understand about the law, and when you see this kind of stuff that happens. Technically, the law says that if, let's suppose that I saw that you copied a piece of my music, okay, and I went, oh, you know what, I saw that, but I'm just going to turn my head. I'm not going to look at it, okay? I'm going to not. And then, let's say I saw that you copied 100 pieces of music, and I said, oh, that was over the line. I'm going to come down on you because you copied 100 or stole 100 pieces of music from me. Okay? So I sue you, but I don't sue him. Okay? And you find out that I didn't sue him, you could come and say, well, you didn't sue him, why are you suing me? And the judge would go, if you don't enforce your copyrights, we're just going to throw this case out. Then I'd lose all my rights to control my copyrights at all, because I didn't enforce and I turned a blind eye whenever there was something that went wrong. So it looks like the industry is being really, really mean about it, but part of it is the fact that we have to control that, or we lose the rights to control it. Okay? So nobody likes to be mean about it, and everybody wants ministry to go on and things like to go on, but we have to respect the copyright law. Questions about that? Okay? Any questions about that? I'm not going to get into all the details about the copyright law, but I'll come back to it quite a bit. Let me show you some things that publishers are doing, okay, that I think are interesting. Our website gives us an awful lot of opportunities to search for things in creative ways. So I'm going to go to the Coral page here. And let's suppose you wanted to do children's music, okay? You could well, we could go to the children's part to do that. I'll go to the children's part to do that. And I want to look up by composer. I want to find all the things that Michael Burkhart did. And let's say I want to choose and say, okay, well, I want to know what Michael Burkhart has done for Thanksgiving for the children, okay? Then I can choose, well, there are two things that fit that category, okay? And actually, those are both older. I want to show you something newer. Let's go to, instead of Thanksgiving, let's go to something like, let's go to Christmas. I'll have more choices. Okay, now what I can do is most companies are now giving you the opportunity to look at like a PDF file. So here's a PDF file of the music, you know, and you've got an MP3 that you could listen to at the same time that you watch. I'm not going to do that right now. You don't know how that works. But we're all experimenting with the ways to actually give you that thing and let you search and look. Okay? Now, for a lot of people, the way we used to do it used to be 8-track tape, and it was cassettes, it was LP, all that kind of stuff. But there's CDs that a lot of companies are doing, but they're going back and forth between, do we use the CDs, do we not use the CDs? do we do that kind of thing? So websites are becoming more and more sophisticated as we go along. The other thing that is happening that will affect you, I think, greatly, is the downloadable material that everybody's kind of going for, and the ability to download and use right away. And now we're all struggling just a little bit because we want you to be able to put it into your iPad or to do that kind of thing with it, but we're still struggling with the technical way the licensing works with the composers and with other people. But that's coming. You guys will have that before long in your in everything that you do. There are really two kinds of publishers, I think, two models for publishing in the United States. One is what I would call an artist-based, okay, and one is a composer-based. Now, let me explain the difference. It's two basic models. Artist-based is kind of what's happening in contemporary Christian music. Is where you have a Chris Tomlin that comes along. And I'll use him as an example. He records a song. Okay? It starts out probably not that much in printed form at all. It may not be printed till much later. But he does a song, people hear it on the radio, or they hear it through a download or something like that, and then they decide to incorporate it into their church. And actually, I know a lot of people who never even see the printed music. They learn it by rote, they sing it, they play it, they do it. It's never hits music. Okay? The other way is probably the way that Dr. Music, most of his music, you started out with pen and paper, you know, and it came to the publisher, pen and paper. We publish it, we print it, and then somebody performs it and it does it. The difference is companies, it's two different kinds of models. And most companies can't do both kinds. They can't figure out how to do artist kind of promotion and do composer contacts. So, as in the world going ahead, for those of you that want to be music ministers and all of that, you will probably deal with multiple publishers. I would say, for example, an Integrity Hosanna or actually Lifeway's becoming more like this, but some of those companies are those artist-driven companies. You would go and find this recording of the favorite person that you like to hear, you know, and they would do it that way. For us, it would be looking for certain composers that you like or doing that kind of thing. So you're going to have to learn how to listen to both and watch for both kinds of companies to come along. And I think that that's kind of interesting because the whole process is just completely different. I'm going to turn this off for a minute because I want to show you something. How many of you are aspiring composers? Okay. I see one. Anybody else? Let me show you a rough little thing of what goes on when you publish a piece of music. Okay? I made a rough drawing. It usually starts out by either what we call a submission or I would ask someone to write something. Okay? That happens with publishers both ways. Sometimes I go after a writer because I think, hey, they're a good composer, I want this piece. I ask them, would you write me something on this? Okay? Today in chapel, the many of you that were in there, that the first piece that Dr. Travis played, the prelude, is one of our pieces, and it started out by a submission. He basically wrote that, sent it to us. I liked it, so it started out right here. Then we go through the selection process. There's several of us that are involved in the selection process, and we decide, based on our market, who we think we can sell this piece to if it's our kind of thing. Sometimes when there's a rejection, it doesn't mean it's a bad piece of music, but it just may mean that it doesn't fit us. Okay? Now, I'm going to stop right there for a second and tell you what does fit us. For MorningStar, for the publishers that we deal with, we do things from a liturgical kind of background. It started out as a company where the person that founded our company was Lutheran, and was very involved in liturgical churches. So it started out with that in mind, and we broadened to include many churches that are come from a traditional or liturgical perspective. So we know if it's a praise song, probably we're not going to be able to sell it very well, because that's not what people look to us for. So we would shy away from it, even if we know it's not, that it's a good song. We think, well, it's probably another company that needs to do it. And as a consumer, that's important for you to realize too. You need to know, okay, hey, I'm looking for this kind of material, so these are the publishers that I'm going to probably find that kind of material from. Or I'm looking for this kind of material, here's this group. And you may have to kind of look back and forth. So we make that selection based upon what we think our market is. Okay? Contract goes out to the person at that point. Then this is where the different kinds of jobs in publishing come in. There's an editing component where a person, when we edit, have to edit the texts and edit the music. Both things get looked at. Okay? And it's sometimes a very labor-intensive process. You know, Terry writes texts. So if we get somebody submitting a piece based on one of his texts, we don't want to assume that that person didn't change any words. They may have changed a word, which is not going to be okay without him saying so. So we go back and find an original version of the text, and who owns the copyright of the text, and how do we run that through, so that they will find out if there's any differences between what was submitted and what was actually written in the first place. So that's the kind of thing that they'll do. They'll find original sources. If it's a tune, if it's a hymn tune, we go back and look and see what the original sources, where did that come from. So the scholarship that you learn in music history and that kind of thing, that's where this goes, okay, right here. And it's very important. I can tell you it's very important. Because if we put out something and we don't credit it right, you wouldn't believe how we get slaughtered in the publications that come out about it. You know, MorningStar didn't do their homework on this. You know, this is the wrong hymn tune that was associated with this, or we put the wrong dates on the composer, or, you know, it goes through a whole series of things, and you don't want to look bad as a company, okay? And it's very, very important. And we have discovered, and I'm sure you discovered this too when you edited the hymnal, that hymnals are not always the best source for those dates, because even though the hymnal committee has tried to do it well, sometimes they've taken it from another hymnal, which maybe wasn't right. And it gets passed down years and years and years with the wrong information. That's a very, very important part of it, okay? Then it goes to an engraving process, which is, the reason we use the word engraving is it used to be all done by hand. I mean, metal plates, and you took the eighth note and you pounded it into the thing. We've still got some around the office, and then of course they would take it, and I mean, it's amazing what they would go through to actually do these engravings. So that goes through. Then it goes to proofing. 3 times it's proofed, okay? Proofed in the office, proofed by the composer, then proofed again after that. Then the second, after it's corrected, it's proofed, actually proofed 4 times because it comes back again. Then we do a recording of it. Then we goes to layout and design. So there's an artist that has to deal with it, okay? Deal with the cover design, what's it going to look like, pre-publication promotion where the music stores know about it before it comes out, conferences that such as the Allu conference, I may be sending out proof copies of stuff to people to look at, going to magazine reviewers, all kinds of things that it goes out to before it's ever published. And then it goes to a release in which it goes to music stores all over the country, and it's officially released, and then we promote it. Whether it's a catalog, which, by the way, I've got copies here of our latest catalog with the CDs. If you want one, you can feel free to take it. So it would show up in something like, you know, this, with the CD on the back, telling all about it, that the consumer would get, and it goes through that process. And then, all kinds of things, such as reading sessions, catalog, Facebook, you know, anything you can think of, okay? And one of the things that we're doing these days is trying to use YouTube because that's a little easier for people. I mean, people like to look at a YouTube video, so we're actually using a videographer in many of our recording sessions when we record and doing little snippets of pieces that we can put on YouTube, something to have a different source. So that's a rough, quick version of that. Any questions about that? Yeah.
Can you explain to us that at the selection, at the contract stage, you also might have texted music?
Right.
So talk about that just a second.
Sure.
How that would work.
Sure. Copyrights apply to, obviously, your text and your music, okay? And you may end up with 3 copyrights on a piece, because sometimes what you will have is a text, you'll have the music, and then they may have used somebody else's arrangement. A good example of that is, you're probably all familiar with Keith Getty. We did a setting of Speak, O Lord, okay? Well, we had John Ferguson, who from St. Olaf College did the arrangement, so we had a set of different kinds of copyrights. So at the bottom of the music, when you look, it should have lists all those different copyrights. So you have to go to the text copyright, tune copyright, arrangement copyright. You can go all the way through on things like that. So that's how that works. In recording, then, you actually add another layer of copyrights. If, let's say, your choir here, Baylor choir, records that piece, there's actually a copyright then that goes on to that recording. They own the copyright of the recording, even though I own the copyright to the music. So it gets sticky, you know, and that's one of the things that churches struggle with is how can we really abide and obey all these copyright laws? One of the things that's real important for you to get familiar with is licensing agencies that are out there, okay? That is really important. Things like CCLI, OneLicense.net are real important because that's where you can be legal with this. And you're only legal if you abide by their guidelines, okay? Which means things like you put the slide up on for a song and it doesn't have the CCLI thing, technically that's not a legal thing, okay? It needs to have the CCLI license listed on it. It needs to, just a second, I'll answer. And then it also needs to be, in some cases, reported or written down someplace so that if you're asked, did you use it, it's recorded someplace that you used it, yes.
What about translations? Does that add yet another layer?
It does sometimes, yes it does. Depending on what it is. Now, that's a hard thing sometimes for the publisher because sometimes we don't know who did different translations of things. But we usually try to track it down and get it. But yes, translation adds another whole layer to it. Yes?
What is the typical royalty split between a text writer and a music writer? Say, Dr. Music wrote the text, Dr. Claybrook did the music.
Okay.
How would they?
Normally it's a 50-50 split. Okay? If it is a contemporary text, let's say, sometimes there's ownership on an older text or a liturgical text, for example, where they will ask a smaller amount. I'm dealing this with Catholics right now because the Catholics have all, anybody here Catholic? Right. Okay. You're going to have new mass words in just a few, you know, we're dealing with that. So there's a group that owns those texts called ISIL. Okay? We have to get approval from ISIL to use the Catholic text. And they want a 3% rather than half. It's just a standard 3%. So that varies, but normally it's a 50-50 split.
But that's 50-50 of 10% or 12%.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. 10% or 12%. Yeah. Or 12.5%.
Or in my case, 25%.
Or you don't get covered. Yes. We try to know those things ahead of time. Yeah, so it's either 10% or 12.5% that goes to them. Then the other thing is, in the industry, as a writer you need to know, or a composer you need to know, is you need to look at your contract. Because as a publisher, I'll send you a contract, it'll say you get 10% of the retail selling price, or it'll say you get 10% of the net. Well, there's a big difference between those two contracts, because 10% of the retail selling price means you buy it from me for, let's say it's a $1 piece of music, you buy it from me, you get 10 cents if you get 10%, okay? If it was a net and you bought it from a music store and they got a 50% discount, you get 5 cents. But if it's a retail price, then you still get 10 cents even if they bought it from you for 50 cents. So it makes a big difference. It can cut a person's royalty in half if they don't negotiate and know what kind of contract they're getting. Yes?
Could you explain again, you mentioned,
In some rare, so if you held on to it for 5 years in your, see, it doesn't apply as much anymore because it is past your death. It used to be a different standard, and it used to be from the published date. Doesn't matter anymore because it's based upon the creator's life. So nobody has to watch that anymore. What we do have to watch is if you send me an arrangement of a Ray Vaughan Williams piece, okay, and I have to go and figure out, because some of his stuff is under copyright and some of it's not, because then it goes back to when it was. So there's a whole set of complications that I didn't get into, because copyright law has changed about 4 times in the United States. And up to a certain point, it was one way, then it was another, and then it was another. And so now we kind of just...
but that's good for you, right?
It's
That
great.
extends.
It's much easier for me. It used to be you had to get 28 years, and then in the 29th year you had to apply for a renewal. And if you missed that renewal, it was in the public domain. And you know, I've known people who sent it in and it didn't get stamped. It was 2 days later that it got stamped, and it was last minute, and so it was in public domain because they didn't stamp it, that it came in the right date. I mean, there was all kinds of horror stories about it. But that doesn't happen anymore like that. Any other questions about those? Those are good questions. What other? Yes?
I mean, purely a question about the submission process.
Sure.
Like, what's how many submitted actually get moved on to the next process?
Very good question. It depends on the genre. There are many more people who write pieces of choral music than they write pieces of organ music, for example, in our catalog, or piano music. I do not get near as much piano or organ as I get choral. Last year, we had almost 1,000 pieces of choral music submitted to us, and we chose 60. 60.
Okay.
So that is the range. Now, out of that 1,000, probably 200, maybe 300, we didn't even hardly look at, because they weren't, you can tell immediately that it was not something that we would publish, because it was either not our genre, or, you know, if somebody wrote their words down and put guitar chords above it and sent it in, and it's like, well, we don't do that. Maybe another company might look at that, but we don't. You know, so I would say if you're a composer, if you ever think about composing, one of the things you need to do is look at the companies you're going to submit things to and get familiar with who publishes the kind of material that you would be doing, and then submit it, because I can see that people didn't really look at it. Then it gets narrowed down from there, but you can see how many, it's a pretty hard process. Yes?
Of the things that you publish, how many did you ask the composer for, and how many came in across the transom?
Okay. Good question. I don't know the answer to it. I would say 1/3 of the things that we published, we asked the composer for, or we knew the composer was doing it and we wanted it. Probably another 1/3, we knew the composers already and had a relationship with those composers, and they sent it in. And then probably 1/3 was a surprise that would have come from the submission process. So that's probably how it worked. I'm really happy that on this next publication list that we're coming out with, there are 4 new composers in our choral catalog, all under 35, who've written gorgeous pieces of music. And it was either somebody calling me up and saying, I remember being out in the yard, getting a call from Sid Davis, who's on your Alleluia conference next year, saying, there's a guy in New York City, I just met him, you gotta hear his music, you gotta hear what this guy did. You know, and so he had his cell phone number, so I called his cell phone number immediately, you know, and he sends me this stuff, and it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So it was great, all done in my backyard in the cell phone. That was kind of right, you know. But, you know, those kind of things happen. But it's often someone relating to it. If you're a young composer, I would suggest that you find a mentor. It is very much, composing is very much like an apprenticeship used to be, okay? It's like an old school art. You know, you need to craft what you're doing, and then you need to take it to somebody and say, what do you think about this? And be open to their criticism about it, okay? And then you need to, like, get it performed. Let people sing it, because you would be surprised. And I have to say, I've been in the publishing business now for a long time, and I'll sit at my desk and I'll say, oh, wow, this is great, this is great. And I go to the recording session and go, oh, I didn't think it sounded quite like that, you know. And then was a little disappointed that I hadn't caught a couple of things and asked for a couple of changes, you know. And then it's too late. I'm at the recording session. You can't change it now, you know. So we try real hard to catch those things ahead of time. It's only experience that'll tell you that, or hearing it performed. Get in there and do those kinds of things. The one thing that has happened with software music writing programs like Finale, Sibelius, and things like that, is made it so easy for people to be composers. And it has made it almost too easy, because then it's like, oh, I can get this down, and then they don't do the next step of actually getting it looked at by somebody and doing the work to make it better. Okay? And it really needs that next step. And I can tell you, in our catalog, there's a composer named Robert Hobby. I've never seen anybody work as hard with other composers as he worked. He had a friend in the UK named Andrew Carter, who he struck up a relationship with, and I mean, he sent every piece to Andrew Carter, and Andrew would look at them and send them back, and he would work on it and send it back to Andrew. And then still today, if I get something from Robert Hobby that has a harp part, I know good and well that a harpist has looked at that. Okay? Or if it's a cello part, that a cellist has looked at that. If it's stuff that he's uncomfortable with writing, he has it played, and I don't have to worry about it. I trust it, because I know it works. Okay? So those are the little things that you put into that project to take it the extra step. Okay? Any other questions about that kind of thing? Those are good questions.
I have a question about the selection process. Do you have a committee that serves as kind of a selection committee, and if so, who's on it? Or
I used to. And we do things several ways. There's a couple of answers to that question. I'm the ultimate person that decides, okay? I have two other people in the office that when we get into it, one person screens everything that we do. He's a wonderful musician. He's graduated from the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music, is a fabulous musician and composer, and knows the kind of thing we're looking for. So he will take this, narrow it to here, okay? And then we sit there and go, okay, now what do you think about this? We've got three pieces that are just similar, all three Christmas pieces normally. Get more Christmas than anything else. Normally all three Silent Night, you know. But you know, you're looking and then you're saying, okay, which of these three are narrow? So then you start really narrowing down. The other thing that we do as a company is we have a series that we work with, and I have a series editor. So I work with Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, has a series. The choral director there, Alan Hightower, and I work together, and I won't pick anything in that series without him seeing it. He can send me things, so that's my committee on that. The National Lutheran Choir, David Sherwin in Minneapolis, they have a series, so we'll work together. I work with the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., and anything that goes through there comes from through there, and they will record what they do. We work with the Presbyterian Association of Musicians. We have a series with them, and I have a series editor. So it's like, depending on what kind of music it is who I work with on selection. That's the way we found it best to do. Some groups have selection committees. I had one for a while, and then I realized it was taking us so long to go through them, and we were coming up with the same decisions that we would have come up with without the committee. So it's just important to have feedback people. So, okay, good question. Let me tell you a few things that I wish I had known when I was where you are. Okay? Things that I wish that I had thought about a little bit more. One is that change is coming. Change is coming. What you're doing now is not necessarily what you're going to do in the future. The way that you're getting music now is not the way you're going to get music in the future. I don't know what it's going to be. Because when I was sitting there, no one had ever thought there'd be something like an iPod. Okay? I mean, that couldn't even imagine what that was like. You know, I mean, we were just off of 8 tracks. And, you know, you just couldn't believe that that would ever be out there. Well, the next thing, we don't know what it's going to be. Okay? So you have to prepare yourself the best you can be and be open to the change that's going to come. The other thing you don't know is you don't know what opportunities are going to come your way. Again, I had no idea that I was going to do this. I went to seminary. In seminary, one of my professors was a man named Talmadge Butler, who immediately, for some reason, saw something in me about writing curriculum and preschool curriculum. So actually, when I was in seminary, I was invited to go to the Sunday school board and to start writing children's choir curriculum. Okay, I was fresh out of seminary at that point. I did that for about 7 years, but it got me interested in the whole idea of publishing and what went on and helped me understand it a little bit. At that same time, when I was in seminary, I grew up in an area there was no liturgical churches. Okay, I mean, I grew up in Southwest Missouri. There was nothing like that. I had never seen anything like that. I went to New Orleans. I remember the Wednesday that I came out of class, and there were these people walking down the street, and they had a black cross on their face, and they were walking out of the Catholic churches, and I thought, what is that? You know, I had no idea what Ash Wednesday was. I had no, you know, and I was in seminary because I had never been exposed to it. I then became very interested later on in liturgical churches, and the first church that I was in used the lectionary. I didn't know what the lectionary was. And it started me down a road of which put me where I am today with this interest in liturgical music and this interest in publishing. Never would I have thought this, okay? So I guess what I'm trying to say is to keep your options open. I love what I'm doing, and I think that my preparation helped me to be able to do what I do, but I wouldn't have guessed it, okay? I wouldn't have known it. Another thing I wish I would have known was I wish I would have known to explore other worship traditions and to look at that more seriously. Okay? I think you all are doing a good job of that here. I think that's something about society that has changed, that you do see other things. But we're seeing more of a diverse crossover between worship traditions than we've ever seen before. And so I think don't be scared about that. Look at it, see what speaks to you, see what interests you, and pursue it and learn about it, because there's some really wonderful things out there. And again, we're going to see change. And I know I grew up, there were certain hymns that I didn't like anymore. You know, and I have to admit that one of them was Marching to Zion, because I grew up singing it in a way that just didn't do it for me, okay? I get to MorningStar, and one of the first things is John Ferguson, again from St. Elmo's College, calls me. He says, I've got this commission for an ACDA convention that's in Florida, and I've got this piece I've got to do. And he said, I think it fits MorningStar perfectly. I said, oh, great, John. I said, you know, it's a big stage, the ACDA convention, all this kind of stuff. That's great. What is it? He says, marching design. And I said, what? What's the Lutheran doing with marching design? You know, you don't sing that. He goes, oh, he says, it's great. Well, do you know now it's in the Lutheran hymnal? Okay? And when I got the arrangement, it completely changed my thinking about the hymn, because he had a different perspective on that hymn than I had on it. And he did this little aleatoric thing about on the words where were there angels around the room. And I mean, when I heard that, it just gave me goosebumps, you know. And now it's one of the favorite things in our catalog, because he changed my mind about it, and he had a different perspective on it. So I closed off that part of my life and then found it kind of reopened again, you know. And that tradition here all of a sudden leaks over and now is in the Lutheran hymnal. Who knows? Another thing I would say is, for any of you, read and study about leadership. I think if anything in what you do, becoming and understanding what a good leader does and how they react will help you in anything that you do. I know that I was very, very, very fortunate when I went to really my second full-time church, in that there was a man that was on staff there who had years of experience. He had been a vice president of the Baptist Sunday School Board, and he had done all this stuff. And I sat back and I could watch him work. And he knew how to work with people in such a way that he would build teams of people who could do anything. And they all thought it was their idea, you know. And he never had to take credit for any of the stuff that happened, but it was all by his initiation that this all got done. And I thought, how did he do that? How did he do that? You know? And then he steered me toward materials and started looking at things, and it changed how I did things in the church. And he was, what you would say, successful every place he went, because he understood how to work with people in a very team-oriented situation. And he was a wonderful leader. I learned more from him than anybody else. I'd say one of the things that I think are lacking in churches today is good leadership skills, okay? Good leadership skills. Because sometimes leadership comes across as, I'm going to tell them what I know, and they're going to do it, okay? And that's not at all what leadership is, okay? I would say that's one thing that came to me later that I would encourage you to do. I think another thing that we say is network, 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 okay? Keep your network going, okay? Keep contact with people and understand where you need to go to get what you need. Diverse experiences in networking is important. A lot of people that I went to school with, when we came out, they went to Ridgecrest and Glorieta, which are the two places that you would go, okay, if you wanted to go to a further education experience. I did that for a while, and then a friend called me. He says, hey, there's this thing at Union Seminary in New York. You want to go? And I said, really? Is there something, you know? We went, it changed my life. It changed my view of some things. And then 2 years later, we were at Westminster Choir College for a thing. And then we were at Yale for a thing. And all of a sudden, my world had opened up in a new way. I didn't give up on Ridgecrest and Glorieta, but I also found out that ACDA was feeding me, that Music Educators Conference was feeding me, that these other kinds of things were giving me a really unique and good experience. And I wasn't just locked in. And yet, I know some friends of mine who have never gone anyplace other than the kind of experience that they got at Ridgecrest and Glorieta, okay? And I would say that they've missed out on some things. So keep your options open and really explore those additional learning activities. The last thing I would say is that try to come down with a real clear understanding of what it is about your calling that's special to you. That's never going to leave you, okay? People ask me sometimes, why did you leave the ministry? I didn't leave the ministry, okay? I feel like what I do now is as much of a ministry as it was when I was in the local church. It's a different kind of ministry for me. My calling is the same as it was back then. It's just taken a different form. And I feel just as strongly about it now as I did back then. But we need all of this kind of thing. We need teachers. We need publishers. We need people in the local churches. You know, it all has to work together to really make it work well. And that's the other thing I think is really important, is discover that sense of call and hang on to it and nurture it. So I wanted to leave room, I got just 6 minutes, I guess, before we're done. Is that right? To answer any questions that you might have, because I've covered a lot of things quickly. But yes.
Yeah. Can you just say about what types of music does MorningStar publish?
Okay.
Instrumental, what kinds of choral music, etc.
Good, thank you. We do choral music, and again, because we look at it from a kind of liturgical perspective, that was our main thrust. You'd have to say music that fits a traditional kind of worship. Then we broadened out into things that are on I'd say, a little harder scale, that would be used in colleges and high schools, particularly things that would have an Old Testament text, for example, that you could do in a public school setting, Latin texts, things like that, that we broadened into on that regard. We do children's choral, and we do sacred and secular, not as much on the secular side, but we do have some. Then on the instrumental side, we do organ, piano, and we're one of the, if not, I think we are actually now the biggest publisher of organ music in the country, which is not a great distinction, but it is. Okay, but we have a large catalog of organ music, and it's very important to our company. And we do different styles in that: concert music, church music, all kinds of organ stuff, piano. On the instrumental side, it has been mostly instrumental music that you do with a keyboard accompaniment. Whether it be solo instruments that are using organ or a piano. A lot of it's been hymn-based, not all of it. We do things like instrumental ensemble, things like brass quintet, quartet, some with accompaniment, some with not. We're now getting into, have just published our first orchestra piece that doesn't need any kind of keyboard. It's just straight orchestra. We've had orchestral things that needed a choral component, but not straight orchestra. And we're doing that first orchestra piece. And then we're taking on the distributorship of another company that is one of the older publishers in the United States, E.C. Shermer. And all of that stuff's coming to us, and they do band, they do a whole larger gamut of things, of which will open us up to have other kinds of opportunities as well. So that's the kind of thing we would do. What else? Vocal solo.
We're singing one of your pieces in men's choir. We're doing Sing Jubilee to the Lord.
In the Luther College series.
Yeah, we're doing that this semester with Baylor men's choir.
And we do books as well. I didn't mention that. We do books. We do Dr. Bradley's book, From Postlude to Prelude. That's one of ours. We do things with the Youth Q. We have a book on youth choirs. We have hymnaries, because we do hymn-related material. Dr. York is writing a choral cycle right now that's based on the Stations of the Cross that I've asked him to write for next Lent. We're talking also about another book with he and Sweet Home Lim about the whole dynamic of what could we be learning from the other cultures, what's in one culture that we need to see that we can learn from them, and how do we communicate back and forth in that. And I think it's an interesting, we're just in the basic processes of doing that. So we do that kind of thing as well. We have some books on building a children's choir, choral tone. I've committed to do a book of which I'm not doing very well on music planning for the music ministry, and I'm trying to broaden it beyond that to music of all kinds. How do you build a strategic plan that then incorporates and builds collegiality among all the people who are working together toward that plan? So that's, and I'm supposed to be teaching it this summer at the National AGO Convention. That's why it has to get done. So, okay, what else? Other questions? Yes?
How do you, with all the authors and composers that want to submit stuff, you want to ask stuff to, what are the ways you keep those relationships going to make sure you...
Oh, that's as the people who are primarily in their catalog, and that are the, I don't want to say most important, but you know what I mean. I mean, people who make up the majority of your sales, for example, and that you know are in there. One of the people in our catalog is Michael Burkhart, who does organ and choral and everything else. Well, I'm on the phone with him an awful lot because we've always got projects going on, Another person that we talk to a great deal is Hal Hobson, because Hal Hobson is the kind of person who wants to talk through a project. He'll call me and say, hey, I've got an idea. What do you think about this idea? And then he'll talk the whole idea through with you, and then you never know what's going to come of it. So,
He happens to be a Baylor graduate.
Is he a Baylor graduate? That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you work on, I mean, I'll tell you an embarrassing story, but it turned out to be good. 3 years ago, I guess, I came down for one of these meetings. I came down 2 days early by mistake. I thought it was on the 16th, and it was on the 18th, and I had written off the wrong date on my calendar. I showed up at Dr. York's office and going, where's the meeting? It's like, well, it's not till Thursday. I'm here 2 days early, I'm going back on the plane. So we had a nice lunch together, and then I thought, now what am I going to do the rest of the afternoon? And I called Hal Hobson. And I said, hey, I've got a couple hours to spend. I'm not going to tell you why. So we went to his house. He says, I've got this idea for this thing, I don't know what to call it. It's these sets of psalms that I've done, all based on hymns that people would recognize in folk songs and stuff. And so we sat there and we worked through this thing the whole afternoon, and it became for us what's called the People's Psalter, and it has been a huge hit. Okay? And I don't know, we may have ended up with it anyway, but my being down here 2 days early and calling him just to check in resulted in this really, really good thing for us. So hey, I'm going to come 2 days early again sometime. But I think it's important to keep those networks open and to communicate as much as you can. So we try to send birthday cards. We try to, we Facebook. We do everything that we can to keep up with people. And it's hard, but that relationship part is very, very, very important. We like to feel like composers are naturally a little competitive with each other. I have people, maybe names, but have people who, if one person comes out with volume 6, the other one's going to come out with volume 7 of theirs pretty quick, because they see that the other person's come out with volume 6. It's just, they see what each other are doing, and they're not competitive in a bad way. It just drives them, it drives them to do this. We like to make them feel like they're all on the same team as much as possible, and not competitive within our catalog, okay? So that if it's good for this one, it's good for this one, if we're having success, And we really work at trying to make it a family or team atmosphere as much as possible with what we do. So, well, I think I'm out of time, but I would encourage you all, anytime you have questions about this kind of thing, and you ever want to write me, feel free to do that, and we're always looking at composers' manuscripts, but send them through mentors or whatever, and then you can contact us. That's great. So thank you. It's been a pleasure. There are catalogs and CDs up here. If you're interested in taking, see the kind of thing that we do, feel free to take them. That's why I brought them.